Just
Okay.
give me 1 minute and I will introduce you. So, welcome everybody again. Today we have Professor Ross King, that works at the Department of Chemical Engineering and Biotechnology at the University of Cambridge. His research goes from the automation of science, DNA computing, to machine learning. He originated the concept of robot scientists, a system that generates hypotheses and designs, conducts, interprets, and replicates experiments autonomously. His interest in DNA computing focuses on using DNA as substrate for building computers, in particular, implementing a non-deterministic universal Turing machine using DNA. And in machine learning, his work relates to methods for quantitative structure activity relationship learning, useful to predict biological activity or toxicity from chemical structures. Professor King is also involved in organizing the International Nobel Turing Challenge and developing machine learning methods to model medication using cancer, as well as at advancing the third generation robot scientists. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ross King to share more about his research and vision for the future of automated science. The stage is all yours. Thank you very much for being here.
Okay. Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the invitation to speak. Okay. Oops. Okay. The big picture. So the scientific method was invented once or discovered once in human history in 17th century Europe, and it's literally transformed the world. Now thanks to technology based on science, billions of people have much better standards of living than the kings and queens and emperors did in the 17th century. You and I have better food than they did. For breakfast, I have, pineapples, peaches, all these wonderful fruits from around the world, which weren't available in winter in Europe in the 17th century. I have much better medical care, and you have better medical care. It'd been terrifying to see a 17th century dentist. I have here a mobile device that allows me to communicate with billions of people around the world. I can fly around the world in a metal airplane, and 17th century, the fastest they could go was in coaches. So the world has been transformed, and we have much better lives, I think, in general, for billions of people. And that is based on science and the technology based on science. And I don't think it's fully appreciated, by even scientists, how much the world has been transformed by science, and it's certainly, at this point in time where science is under attack in some parts of the world, it's these people don't seem to realize the gifts that science has provided for humankind. But however, to meet the challenges of the 21st century, we have, still around about 1 billion people live in food insecurity. We have pandemics. We're still facing horrible diseases like cancer. And I think, if the world collaborated and got together, all the countries in the world got together and shared existing technology and shared our resources, we could meet these challenges of the 21st century, though it make these sacrifices for the Western world. But unfortunately, I don't see any prospect of that happening. I don't see any chance of the world getting together to collaborate to deal with the world's problems. In fact, things are going in the opposite direction. The world's becoming more divided. So I think the only way to meet these challenges, climate change, etc., is to have better science and technology, and to make science and technology more efficient. And the only way I can reasonably see that to happen is through the application of AI to science. Only that can actually make science more efficient and help solve the world's problems. So it's not a new idea to apply AI to science. It goes back to the 1960s and 70s in Stanford and in California. Two projects called the Dendril and Metadendril projects. They're worth looking up. The application area was mass spectrometry, and a particular application was for the Viking probes to Mars. So they wanted to test to see whether there's life on Mars. They sent a mass spec machine there, and since Mars is very far away, even at the speed of light, it can take up to 7-10 minutes to communicate there. So you can't easily sort of remotely control things. They wanted the Viking rover to do its own autonomous science on Mars. Uh, and actually, I remember as a small child when NASA announced they had found life on Mars through the Viking probes. They had taken some Martian soil, added water, and got evidence of life. A few days later, they actually retracted that claim, but it's still not clear to this day what happened, and nor has the experiment ever been replicated. So it's an interesting question. This project was led by Joshua Lederberg. He got the Nobel Prize for medicine for he basically discovered sex in bacteria, which kicked off the biotechnology revolution. After he won his Nobel Prize, he went back into the lab, taught himself to program, became very interested in the philosophy of science, and he was the intellectual lead of this. He was very interested in philosophy and logic. Ed Feigenbaum was the main AI person in the project. He got the Turing Award for his work on expert systems. The Turing Award is, for those who don't know, is the equivalent in computer science of the Nobel Prize. He's still alive, and I met him a few years ago, and he's still interested in this field. Bruce Buchanan is a founder of machine learning, and Carl Djerassi, he's dead now, but should, in my view, should have got Nobel Prize for chemistry. Does anyone know what Carl Djerassi did? After penicillin, I think it was the most important, at least for the society, small molecule of the second half of the 20th century. Transformed society. But it was controversial, that's why I didn't win the Nobel Prize. The birth control pills. So he was the entrepreneur, actually, who did it. And he also was the main chemist on this mass spectrometry project, and he was a genius chemist. So AI systems already have superhuman scientific powers. They can flawlessly remember vast numbers of facts. They can do, unlike human beings, they can do flawless logical reasoning. They can do near optimal probabilistic reasoning. So if you have a small amount of data, an AI system can analyze it better than a human can. They can learn from vast amounts of data. Basically, they can learn from everything that's on the internet. It's unbelievable how much data they can incorporate. They can, quotes, read millions of scientific papers. In fact, these large language models have ingested all the papers thousands of times in their learning process. So they have these skills which are way beyond what humans can do and are actually complementary to human scientists. And I think it's increasingly being accepted that science is a good application for AI, but that wasn't always the case. And it's a number of reasons why science is so good as an application of AI. One is it's a bit like a game, but you're playing with the real world, which is also much more important than, say, chess or Go or something. And scientific problems are restricted in scope. That means that if you want an AI scientist or human scientist, who's studying, say, physics, they don't need to understand about vegetables or history or politics or whatever. They just need to know about physics. And that really makes it easier for the AI system to do the reasoning. Another advantage is that nature is honest. And by this, I mean that if a human or a machine scientist does an experiment, we're fairly confident that the real world doesn't systematically try to fool us about what happened in that experiment. So there's not a conspiracy of the real world trying to fool scientists how it works. And we're pretty sure about that. Yeah. And that makes the reasoning much easier than, say, if you have an AI system in, say, doing something to do with the stock market, for instance, or military games. Many of the agents in these games are dishonest, so it makes it harder to do the reasoning about what's happening. But a scientific experiment is, in some sense, honest. We may misinterpret the meaning of the experiment, but the real world's not trying to fool us, so that makes things easier. I also think that nature is a worthy object of our study. So unfortunately, many, if not most of the the smartest people in AI, what they're doing is not doing anything for the public good. They're just trying to maximize the profits of big American corporations. You know, they may be improving the advertising for these corporations or something like that. And that is, I don't know if there's any students out there listening about what you want to do in the future. I would, if when you look back on your life, do you want to really think, I've got a lot of money, but did I just make some richer people even richer, not do something positive for the planet? So I think doing science is something positive, at least if that scientific knowledge is in the public domain and is a positive good. Okay, to my contribution. So my contribution is the concept of a robot scientist. Sometimes this is called now an AI scientist or a self-driving lab. It's, there's a number of names. But the basic idea is the same, is that we want to build a computer robotic platform which can, in a sense, do scientific research on its own autonomously. So a robot scientist has background knowledge about an area of science. This knowledge is in my systems expressed in probability theory and in logic. It has a way of autonomously forming novel hypotheses about that area of science using different types of machine learning, mostly in AI systems. The robot scientist also then has a way of autonomously deciding on efficient experiments to test these hypotheses. So these experiments are efficient in terms of time and money, because these are the two constraints which scientists work under. We need to get the answer first to get credit, and we also need to limit the amount of money we spend in getting that answer. We don't have unlimited resources. And AI systems are very good at selecting efficient experiments. So once the experiment's been selected, the robot scientist then programs a lab automation, lab robotics to actually execute the experiments. They look at the results of the experiment and interpret them in terms of the hypotheses. So if the experiments are consistent with the hypotheses, the hypothesis becomes more probable. If the experiment contradicts the hypothesis, then the hypothesis becomes less probable. So we're using a sort of Bayesian framework for doing this. That's the basic idea. Why did I want to do this? The original motivation was philosophical. I am and was interested in what is science. And the idea is that if you can build an artifact, a machine that does scientific research, that tells you something about the nature of science. So it's what's called an operational approach to the philosophy of science. Instead of just looking at what people have done in the past about science, we've tried to build a machine to do scientific research. And you may be able to read this. This was on Richard Feynman's blackboard, the famous physicist at the time of his death. And it says, what I cannot create, what I cannot create, I do not understand. So it's the same idea. It's like an operational approach to understanding. You want to build an artifact that does something. The other motivation is the one I started with, technological. I want to make the scientific process more efficient to help solve the world's problems. So robot science have the potential to increase the productivity of science. They can work cheaper, faster, more accurately, and longer than human beings. They can also be more easily multiplied. If I have a successful robot scientist, I can build many of them. But to multiply a human scientist, it takes 20, 25 years to grow another one. So that's one advantage. The other advantage is that increasingly important actually is the potential to improve the quality of science. So in many areas of science, including biomedicine, there is a huge problem with reproducibility of results. So roundabout, estimates vary, but it seems to be that around about half of the papers that are published in top scientific journals, Nature and Science, the main results of the paper cannot be replicated in other labs. And that is not because of, or generally not because of any scientific misconduct. It's just that the scientists involved haven't been able to record in enough detail the actual details of their experiment. And I know this myself, it's very hard to get replicatable results and if you're dealing with anything biological. And so robot scientists have the potential to help with reproducibility. An experiment done by robot scientists is completely explicit of why it's being done, the goals of the experiment. any conclusions. You can follow the paper trail from experimental results to any conclusion, etc., etc. So, and also robots are, just are better with pipetting and things, these basic things that make the experiments more reproducible. So I've been working on this for a quarter of a century now. The original work, we just showed that different steps in that cycle could be individually implemented, and we rediscovered some already known science. I shall talk about the Adam project in a bit of detail. We built a full-scale artifact. We built an actual physical robot scientist which could work with use functional genomics, and Adam discovered some novel science autonomously. I'll then talk about Eve, which applied the same idea to neglected tropical diseases, and finish off with Genesis. This is Adam. The application area for Adam was in yeast functional genomics, Saccharomyces cerevisiae. This is the organism used to make beer and wine and whiskey, etc., bread. But in biomedicine, we use it as the model eukaryotic cell. So it was first sequenced back in 1996, I think. And has roughly 6,000 genes. But still to this day, around about 15% of these genes have no known function. So use functional genomics is about trying to find the function of these genes. So that there was a couple of European projects called Eurofine 1 and 2. And what they did was they systematically knocked out every single gene in the yeast genome, and then looked at the phenotype to see if that gave some clue about the function of the knocked out gene. So the reasoning process is similar to, if you want to understand the components of a car, you remove the steering wheel from the car, and then the car no longer steers very well, so they infer that the steering wheel is to do with steering. That's the logic which was used by the biologist and as by Adam. I'll try to explain some of these logical terms, which even a lot of AI people don't fully understand and appreciate. So the main type of logic, or the original type of logic, is called deduction. So here's an example of a deduction. You have a rule, all swans are white. You have a fact that Daffy is a swan. Therefore, you infer deductively that Daffy is white. And the beautiful thing about deduction is that if the rule is true and the fact is true, then you can only infer new truths. So it's truth-preserving form of inference, which is a beautiful thing. So deduction was discovered or invented 2,500 years ago by Aristotle. It is the foundations of mathematics. So if you learn mathematics, you get a set of axioms and inference rules, and then you can only infer new mathematical truths from that. It's also the foundations for computer science. So when a computer runs, it's basically doing deduction. Computers were invented by, the Turing machine was invented by Alan Turing to better understand deduction. Unfortunately, deduction is insufficient to do science. We need some new ideas from somewhere. So one such inference approach is called abduction. And here's an example of that. You have all swans are white. You have the fact that Daffy is white. Therefore, you abduce that Daffy is a swan. Okay. And the thing to note here is that this inference is not necessarily correct, but it's one hypothesis which you can then go and experimentally test. Yeah, Daffy is a duck. I don't know if anyone reads the Sherlock Holmes short stories and novels, but if you do, Sherlock Holmes routinely says that I deduced that the murderer was the butler because of the footprints in the library or something like that. He's technically incorrect there. What he's doing is abduction. He's inferring a possible cause for an effect. So if you look at these examples, it's not deduction because there's always some other possible explanation which could be involved. Deduction is guaranteed to be true, and his inferences are not guaranteed to be true. But that's what detectives do, and what a lot of science, a lot of biology is actually abductive. You're inferring some missing component in the cell has some property or something. That's abduction. The other type of way of inferring new ideas is through induction. Here's an example. So Daffy is a swan in white, Tutti is a swan in white. Therefore, you infer inductively that all swans are white. This is called induction. It's like generalization. This is the if you do any machine learning, is basically induction. It's generalizing from examples, but it's also not guaranteed to be correct. This example about swans being white was used by Aristotle 2,500 years ago. It was taught in universities for 1,000 years in Europe. But when explorers got to New Zealand, they found the swans are black there. So there's always some possible other things could happen with induction. So induction is the reason why you think it's safe to eat your breakfast, the reason that the laws of physics will continue tomorrow, etc., why the sun will rise. That's just generalization. There's no logical guarantee any of these things will happen. It's just generalizing from examples. And famously, the Scottish philosopher David Hume pointed out that the reason that we believe in induction is itself an induction. So you're just using induction to generalize about generalizations. There's no guarantee we know what's going to happen. But all scientific laws are basically inductive. Yes. Okay, to come back to the functional genomics of yeast, we wanted to have a machine to do its own research, so we had to formalize everything. We used logic programming to represent the background knowledge. Logic programming is a type of computer programming where you use basically logic as the language for computation. It's good for representing knowledge. And we modeled metabolism as a directed label hypergraph. So if you want, all of science is about you use a model to infer things about the real world. Our particular model was this thing called a directed label hypergraph. That's a particular abstract piece of mathematics. And we used abduction to infer new hypotheses. So most of biology is about inferring new facts about the world rather than new scientific laws. And we use a thing called active learning to decide on efficient experiments. So active learning is a branch of machine learning where the computer gets to choose its next examples. And there's a very close analogy between the scientific method and active machine learning. Okay, so traditionally, science is what's called the hypothetical deductive method. So you infer a new hypothesis by some technique. This is the eureka moment of Aristotle in the bath, thinking of a new idea. In biology, as I said, is mostly abductive, not inductive. And Adam used what's called abductive inference to infer missing arcs and labels in its graph hypotheses. So these missing arcs and labels are essentially new relationships between enzymes and metabolites. And if you make this hypothesis, then you can deduce experiments to test it. And that's what Adam did. And it deduced that it would see certain things in certain experiments if its hypothesis was correct. And then it went away and actually did the experiments to test the hypotheses. So that's how it works. So you have a hypothesis generated by abduction, and then Adam deduced the consequences of the hypothesis in terms of experiments, and then tested experiments. That's what human scientists do as well. So Adam generated and confirmed novel functional genomics hypotheses about genes encoding enzymes in what are called orphan reactions in yeast. We then went into the lab and did gold standard experiments to test these hypotheses. So we expressed the gene product of these enzymes. Sorry, we expressed the gene products of these particular genes, which had an unknown function. These were enzymes, and we then tested the enzymic function of these gene products to be what we predicted or what Adam predicted. That's why we claim that Adam was the first machine to autonomously discover novel scientific knowledge, both hypothesize and experimentally confirm that knowledge. So our next robot scientist was called Eve, much better designed robot. Its application area was in neglected tropical diseases, malaria, schistosomiasis, leishmania, etc. So these are horrible diseases. Around about 1 million people die every year for these diseases, mostly babies in Africa from malaria. Uh, the Shockingly, these diseases are neglected by the pharmaceutical industry, which means that they don't try to find new drugs for them because they believe that they will not make enough money for doing so, that the people's lives don't matter enough to find drugs. This is very shocking to me, and it's outrageous that they won't look for new drugs. And I also think they've got the economics of it wrong, because one of the things about these diseases is that they're actually probably much easier to treat than, say, Western diseases, which we don't really understand the causation very well. Here we understand the causation very well. There's a parasite, and to cure the disease, you need to just kill the parasite. And these parasites are, they diverged. Some of these, like the malaria parasite, diverged well over 1 billion years ago. So there's lots of differences there to exploit. Anyway, so we wanted to do this automatically. So we used graphs and standard chemoinformatics methods to represent the background knowledge of the molecules. We used induction. In particular, we learned what are called quantitative structure-activity relationships, QSARs. These are little machine learning models or statistical models where you put in the chemical structure and it outputs the predicted activity of a molecule. And again, we used active machine learning to decide on efficient experiments. Here's a little video of Eve working. So Eve itself is nothing particularly special in terms of laboratory automation, though it's probably a bit more tightly integrated than you'll see in most companies. But what's important about Eve is the fact that the experiments have been designed by the AI system to test its hypotheses. So that's what's happening here. Eve has a hypothesis about what type of molecules will make the QSAR. We'll find out more information about the best QSAR. And it's taking the yeast out of the, so it's a 384 microtiter plate, taking the yeast out of the incubator, is giving it a shake, and is going to add certain small molecules to the different wells in the plate to test whether they're good at, say, antimalarial drugs. And now it's doing some just plate reader to see how much growth has occurred. We did a lot of work to demonstrate that this use of AI is actually economically rational. So before the work on Eve, what the drug industry would do is they'd have a big library of compounds, maybe 1 million, maybe a couple of million compounds, and they would just start at the beginning and test them all one by one until they finished, and then do the data analysis. And the idea of Eve was that once you start finding compounds that work, these are called hits, then you can start learning straight away, and then you can actually go and use what you've learned to find the compounds most likely to work, so that you can save a lot of money by time and by not using all your compounds, which are literally the crown jewels of the pharmaceutical industry, are these compound libraries. What this diagram shows is that for most of the space, the blue and green part, it's rational to use AI to do the experiments rather than just doing all the possible experiments. Of course, if it's very, very expensive to miss a single compound or miss some compounds, then you have no choice but to have to test them all. But rationally, you don't need to do that most times. Now I'll talk about Genesis, our latest robot scientist. Its application is to systems biology. And biological systems are incredibly complicated. Even our model systems, E. coli, Saccharomyces, they have literally thousands of genes, proteins, small molecules, all interacting in complicated temporal spatial ways. Very, very complicated. On top of that, these systems also evolved over 3 billion years. So they do things in weird ways which no human engineer would ever think of because of some historical past thing that maybe even happened 1 billion years ago or more. So Occam's razor, the idea that simple systems are most likely doesn't work very well in biology because of their past history. So I'd argue that there's not enough PhDs in the world to disentangle these systems anytime soon. And on top of that, these systems biology models are very complicated. They have thousands of components and things, which make it very difficult for human intuition. So I would argue that we need help from robot scientists or AI scientists. So I'm working on trying to understand the eukaryotic cell. This is in particular in using yeast as a model organism. Even though humans and yeast diverged a good billion years ago, the basic design of the eukaryotic cell is the same. I've been trying to develop specialized hardware to do this. I've called a system called Genesis. We'll describe it in more detail. The idea is to have in parallel 100, 1,000, or to maybe even 1,000 closed loop cycles of experiment happening at once. And so the AI system will be designing every day 100 new experiments or 1,000 new experiments to test its model of this eukaryotic cell. So the AI system will plan, execute, and design all these 100 experiments per day and record all the information. Here's an example of one of the modules of Genesis. So we're making a little chemostat. For those who don't know, chemostat is a type of continuous flow bioreactor. It's very useful if you're trying to model biological systems because the flow of the chemostat controls the growth rate of the microorganism. And that, if you can control that, allows you to make the models much more, find out much more about the model. If you can control the system, its growth rate, and make it a steady state. But it turns out to be quite challenging to physically make small chemostats, which are accurate enough to get good data out. So it's complicated microfluidics to do all this, or mesofluidics. We're talking about milliliters of liquids. And the challenging part is the software to go with this. There's the hardware, which has taken longer than I had hoped to develop. But so on the software side of things, we have different models of the cell system. We have some of these models are logical. Some of them are much more differential equation based. We need a database to keep all the models that we've been modeling with. If we're using, say, 100 new experiments a day, these will have modifications of the model which will be experimenting. So I need a specialized database to control that. And a specialized database to control all the hypotheses we're generating. We'll have an AI agent responsible for every gene, protein, small molecule in the system. And to control all these resources, we also need what we're calling a virtual research council. So that sits on top of all the different agents to decide which agent gets the resources of the next experiment. Okay, I want to finish off the technical side of this, talk about something that's been interesting at the moment. And that is the formalization of science. The goal of science is to increase our knowledge of the natural world through doing experiments. And I argue that this knowledge should be expressed in formal logical languages. It shouldn't be expressed in English or Mandarin or any human natural language, nor should it be expressed as just weights in a black box neural network. That knowledge should be expressed in something formal which we can understand and machines can understand. So the semantics needs to be clear. So only formal languages promote semantic clarity. And without semantic clarity, it's very hard to get reproducibility and to do scientific reasoning. I'm not sure if the whole audience remembers this, but it's like a pocket history of AI. So in the beginning, there was AI systems were based on logical inference. And then in the 1980s, they realized that logical inference wasn't enough. You needed to have knowledge about specific areas. These were called expert systems. And in the 1980s, there was a big AI hype cycle. Lots of money was made, lots of companies were generated, quite similar to now in some ways. And expert systems had many really nice features. An expert system, could say be diagnose diseases or act as a doctor, and they work pretty well. And in fact, the national health system uses such systems now to this day. And one of the nice things about such systems is that, unlike our modern AI systems, if you ask an expert system, why did you decide something? Why has this patient got this particular disease? It will give you a reasoned answer, which is the correct answer for its reasoning, why it did it. Given these symptoms, these are symptoms of this disease, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so you get a proper explanation, which is deductive and correct. That is different from our current large language models. However, the the expert system project basically failed, and that was due to what's called the knowledge acquisition bottleneck. We couldn't get enough knowledge into these systems to make them really useful. If we asked a human expert, asked a human doctor, why did you diagnose this disease? They have no understanding of their intuition or why they actually did something typically. So it's very hard to get knowledge out of human beings. And at that point, machine learning systems couldn't extract knowledge from natural language texts, you know. Uh, and interestingly, actually, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was the neural network community, the people that actually got Nobel Prizes and things now. They promised at that time they would do all the things they achieved recently back then in the early 90s. They said you shouldn't work on these expert systems. You should use neural networks. We can recognize faces, solve natural language, etc., etc. It turned out not to be true, but 30 years later, it was true. It's interesting. And there's the scientific literature out there. So there's, I don't know, 100, 200 million papers, and these literally store the joint wisdom of humankind. And we can't access that knowledge properly yet. No human can read that literature. We can only read a tiny fraction of it. And if you ask a large language model about it, it is not always reliable. It makes things up. And that's because it sort of almost has to because of the way it's engineered. It can't possibly uh, really understand and know the facts there because it's a generalization, it's induction. But what they do remarkably well, actually, large language models, is formalize natural language, formalize knowledge taken from natural texts. So you can ask a large language model, please read this piece of text and convert it into a formal form, say in your favorite language, say first order predicate logic or something. And they do that remarkably well. So this allows us to, for the first time, to actually start extracting knowledge from the scientific literature at scale. And once you've actually got it knowledge into a formal form, then you can actually test it to see whether it's correct or not and check whether it's mentioned in other texts and whether you can actually then connect it to a robot scientist to experimentally see whether that experiment is correct or not. So we have this possibility now to generate certified knowledge at a scale that's never been possible before. This is my dream, my vision. I want to take the scientific literature and use modern AI and turn this into something formalized, not just a black box neural network, but with its knowledge in weights, but in a formal form which we can actually look at and read and check. I've been working on the formalization of science for a long time. This is some work I did 20 years ago. I formalized an issue of Nature. So I took, here are two papers published in this particular issue of Nature. One from high energy physics, about the mass of the top quark, and the other about phylogenetics of these cute insectivores from the West Indies. And once you start formalizing things, writing down what the paper is actually about, you realize a lot of things. So for instance, the high energy physics paper should never have been published. It was clearly statistically flawed. As soon as you wrote down what they had done, it was obvious that they had taken some old data from they collected, thrown away the data points they didn't want and got the answer they wanted. So the answer they published turns out to was wrong. I was when I analyzed it, I wasn't sure of that, but it seemed to be right. So this high energy physics group, 300 authors, and they published a really bad paper in Nature. It's shocking, and it's never been retracted. It gives the mass all wrong. The mass they knew before this paper was much more accurate than the mass they published. So formalization can help. The uh, the paper about this London was also was much better paper. It was clean. But interestingly, the information there is also over time got better estimates of how old these Sloanodon things are. So formalization is important, I think. It's only how else can we check the literature? So these are examples of formalized knowledge from these papers. And I think formalizing literature is going to supercharge automating science. Yeah, so coming back to large language models, literally $1 trillion has been invested in trying to make them more trustworthy and trying to do reasoning. But the architecture of large language models means that it's very hard to see how they can ever produce reliable reasoning because they have no notion of truth. They have no notion of even probability. You can't inspect their inner reasoning. And yeah, they just do a very badly job at logical inference. Uh, and it's interesting, if you human psychologists sort of classify human intelligence to two components. One is the thinking fast, thinking slow. So one is the perpetual sort of perception, intuitive reasoning, and the other is slow logical planning reasoning. And this current generation of AI, they're basically solved a lot of this fast inference things. They're very good at recognizing faces, making snap judgments about things. They do a very bad job at planning and making arguments which are logical correct. And humans aren't great at that either. You can see our systems are sort of bolted on top of some more primitive type inference things. We really struggle, a lot of people, to reason properly. But in computer science, we know how to do that very efficiently now. So this is how these big tech companies are trying to do reasoning at the moment, most of them. You have a reasoning prompt, and then you have a lot of large language models that speak to each other and maybe prompt each other, and you have a wrapper around about them. And then they may output an answer which is maybe correct. To me, this is incredibly ugly and also stupid. I think it's called what we call a dog's dinner. So it's like a mess. It's not. I think trustworthy reasoning is a solved problem. We've been working on logic for literally 2,500 years, and we know how to do it correctly. Basically a computer is doing logical reasoning all the time perfectly correctly. So logical reasoning produces trustworthy reasoning. And I think the way forward for AI is some sort of combination of these two things. Expert systems on their own produce correct reasoning, but they can be very brittle. That means that if you go outside their area of expertise, they just break down completely. They're hopeless. Whereas large language models are very robust, and you can apply them to almost anything, but they're not necessarily correct. So the future is some sort of combination of these two things, I would argue. Okay, the future of AI for science. I'm very interested in trying to organize a prize for AI in science. So if anyone knows any rich people, preferably a billionaire, who wants to donate money to this prize, or some country or something. I managed to track down Eric Schmidt's email, but he never replied. So anyone else, so the idea is that prizes can sort of make people work towards different goals. The Nobel Prize is a spur for science in some sense. And the idea of this prize is that over the years, the science done by the machines will get better and better, and eventually to be better than that of the Nobel laureates. Uh, I'm also been trying to agitate at the European level for a CERN for AI and science. And in fact, this may actually happen. You know, the Commission may eventually invest heavily in this. It, the the British government may also do something in this space. But my concern is that by the time that these national governments actually do it and put things in the public domain, the tech companies will have built their own labs and you know, it's a huge investment going into, especially material science now in America of startups. You know, crazy money going into £500 million for a Series A and things. These are huge investments. You know. And there's something of a gold rush in the area of AI for science now, and that's become mixed up with geopolitical type things. You know. Okay, I think there's this analogy I mentioned earlier about between science and games, and in chess and Go, there's this continuum ability from novices up to grandmasters, and computers follow this path. You know, I remember uh, computers used to be very poor at chess. You know, better than me, but still nowhere near as good as a good human. Now my mobile phone can beat the world champion at chess trivially. You know, it's so much better. And computers, you know, went up this, got better and better at these games. And I think there's an analogy with science, and that uh, there's a continuum of abilities of science from the simple types of science that Adam and Eve can do, up through the type of science you and I can do, up to the grandmasters of science, you know, the Newtons and Einsteins and things. And if you accept that there's this continuum of ability in the ability to do science, then I'd argue it's very likely that computers will get better and better at science. You know, hardware is getting better all the time, software is getting better, the lab automation is getting better, and humans are not getting any better at science. You know, in fact, there's good evidence that humans are actually slowly getting worse at science. You know, by that I mean the amount of science you get out per pound spent is getting less over time. And 100 years ago, sorry, 10 years ago, the physics Nobel Prize winner Frank Wilczewicz said that in 100 years' time, the best physicist will be a machine. So I've been involved in this thing called the Nobel Turing Challenge. This was the kickoff event 5 years ago. The idea of the Nobel Turing Challenge is by the year 2050 to be able to build a machine, artifact, robot scientist type system, which can do Nobel Prize quality scientific research. And if you can build one machine that can do Nobel Prize research, then you can build 10 machines, 100 machines, a million machines. What would the world be like with a million world-class scientists? So we kicked off in 2020, just before the pandemic. So during the pandemic, I thought the probability of achieving the 2050 deadline was decreasing. But in the last few years, with the rise of large language models and things, I think the probability is increasing. And I think there's a real likelihood that this could happen. And we should start planning for a world where we have no shortage of genius science. This is the 2023 meeting. You can see at the front, this is Ed Feigenbaum. He was part of the Metadendral and Dendral team. He's a Turing Award winner. Okay, I'd like to thank all my collaborators over the years, and to thank you for listening to my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that interesting talk. If you would like to join me to a round of virtual applauses of this talk, thank you very much. So I don't know if Anyone has a question from the audience? Okay, there is one question in the chat. Um, Given that the literature is being flooded by fake papers written by AI, it is possible that AI will get worse when it starts to feed unfake knowledge. Do you think that this is a real risk? From David Colham.
Well, I think, well, it's certainly true. There's a huge problem at the moment. Uh, in fact, it's true, probably worse than the machine learning AI research. It's what I think there is reason for hope is that science doesn't depend on uh, fake generation of text. It depends on the correspondence between scientific uh, theory, facts, with experimental results. So if your theory says something will happen in an experiment and it does, then that supports the theory. It doesn't depend on what people write. So ultimately, the what's true and not true in science depends on physical experiments. But that doesn't, there is a problem at the moment of people just generating fake science. It's and yeah, it's the scientific literature is well has been struggling for a long time, you know, and it's completely broken in some areas of AI.
It is it's a difficult problem, no? That's also related with the hallucination that comes from LLMs and difficult to control. Definitely.
Well,
That
this is worse. This is deliberate people trying to make fake papers to improve their, productivity scores and things. So it's if these papers are, don't have any experimental results to justify their new results, then you should be a bit worried about it.
Well, they just invent experimental results, don't they?
Yes.
Simulate them.
So yeah. So it's. I think ultimately we need labs which are in the public domain which can test scientific things which we see openly whether they're correct or not. But I have no magic answer to this.
there is another question in the chat. It looks like the main bottleneck right now is building the hardware, not software, for such an scientist. Do you agree? Do you think that there is a need to redesign most of the laboratory equipment for such an approach?
I think the biggest problem is software, AI, getting AI systems to the really hard problems about how to make an AI system truly do something original. It's like uh, of course there's degrees of originality, but to be a really brilliant idea like an Einstein thinking of special relativity based, things like that. These are the really deep questions. We've had a lot of difficulties with the hardware, way more than I hoped or expected, and it's the physical world is much harder to deal with than software in general, because it's not infinitely malleable like software is. But the really deep problems are still making AI smart enough to be as good as top scientists. We're nowhere near there yet, I think.
Okay. And one last question. This one is from me, and it's a little bit more from the philosophical side. And is that so we've been talking a lot about like the AI producing science, no? But what I've recently feel is that the AI is taking over all these creative jobs because anyway, science is a part of it. Like you need to be a creative person to join different ideas and bring them like to infer, abduct, deduct the reality of them. So what is your position and what is your vision of the human kind role when the AI is taking over the production of science?
Well, I think humans plus machines are still way better than machines are alone. I think it's very hard nowadays to compete if you don't use some form of AI to help in your research. But I think so one lesson which we had from chess and is that until at least very recently, humans plus computers were better at chess than computers alone. There was positions which the computer didn't understand as well as humans because they're sort of deeper and or more spatially interesting and things like this. So I think there's still a long way to go. Humans working with machines to do better than either can alone, I think. And I think the humans are sort of up the food chain. We decide on what to work on, what are the deep questions, we need to find answers to. Machines aren't good at that. I don't even know they're doing science, just like a computer chess machine doesn't know it's doing chess. They're still very limited in their understanding of what's going on.
Okay, it sounds a little
One
bit
big
like
question is actually whether you can have a genius level AI scientist, which isn't part of a general AI. So can you just, people used to think you needed general AI to play world-class chess, but that's not the case. But is it the case you need to have a general AI to do world-class science? I don't know. Or can some specialist system be good enough?
it sounds like it. Okay, well, let's get to that point, and then we will see and figure out what we do at that point as a humankind. Okay, we're running a little bit out of time. Thank you very much for that interesting talk. I hope that you have enjoyed, and all the audience. It was really interesting. Yes, let's comment. David, you want to give say something? A last comment.
Yes, I'm puzzled about why people think that LLMs can ever come up with anything new, given that they work by auto-completion. It seems,
Because it's such a complicated, such a deep autocomplete that it becomes original at that. It's just like, it's a quantitative difference can make a qualitative difference. They have so much information in there, and sometimes, I believe my experience, they do something original. Sometimes it's not original, but sometimes it is. It's just
yes, but much of the information on the web is very unreliable. And and,
yes, but they
and
sort of, they integrate it together. They've read everything, so sometimes what they come up with is useful, and I use them all the time in my research now to help. And I don't think it's the full answer to human intelligence or things, but I think that it's a huge breakthrough. I'm very surprised, because I come from for years and decades we thought that to be so clever, an AI system would have to have an internal model of the world, an explicit internal model, which they don't have. I assumed it also needed to be embodied, to have some sort of understanding of the physical world through interacting with it. They don't do that either. So I don't think we have good intuition about how these things work.
no, in my experience, they don't work very well, actually, but I guess it depends on what sort of things you're asking.
Yeah, certainly wouldn't rely on it to save your life, but it can be very useful, I think.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for everyone to attend, to participate in this round of seminar. Um, I don't know if Professor Ross, you have any last comment.
No, I think as far as I understand what you're doing, I think it's one of the most important applications of AI at the moment in biology. It's interesting actually I don't know if you've seen from the research councils how they're organizing future science, how engineering biology is going in with AI and engineering and computer science rather than with medicine and biology. It's interesting. I don't know whether you agree with that ontological distinction, but I think that means there's more money in that space.
We need to push AI and machine learning in all fields. I think it's not only for specific ones. And as long as there are organizations that they want to push, then there is hope to move them.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks everyone again. Don't forget to stay tuned with our seminars. Next talk is the 25th of March with Professor Ben Letter.